Data quality is a huge challenge in that it's one of the fastest ways to erode trust. So if your business users are the ones reporting problems back to the data team that they find in Power BI dashboards, Tableau dashboards, reports that get generated, or data products that they're using, that is the fastest way to eliminate and lose that hard-earned trust in the quality of the data and how reliable it is. So observability helps with ensuring trust in your data because it helps your data team be the ones that find out about those problems, regardless of where they happen in your data pipeline, whether it's at data entry time, issues with ETL jobs, problems with data modeling itself, and identifying those issues proactively so that the data team can get ahead of them and not allow them to reach those business users, and making sure that you're proactive about them. That's the way to build trust over time with the business and the data that they're using.
Awesome. So here I'm going to talk about a real world impact of from one of our customers. So applying good governance and observability has many real world applications. So Society Insurance is one of the customers, a niche insurance carrier specializing in restaurants and bar industries. For instance, if someone falls in one of these establishments, they need insurance coverage. So Society Insurance embarked on a 10-month data governance journey, which is led by Kirsten Kerr, their data governance manager, who also presented her story at the recent Gartner conference. So within this record timeline, Kirsten focused on four key areas. One is boosting literacy, which is really about the employees to ensure all stakeholders understand different business KPIs. Second is enhancing operational efficiency, which is identifying factors contributing to claims, and which also empowers their risk management teams to investigate the common causes of claims, and also building a prevention strategy around claims that can enhance their policyholder experience as well as profit margins for the company. So throughout this journey, Society Insurance was supported by C-suite leaders from executive council. If you go to the next build over, Kyle, different data leaders from architecture, engineering, governance, and business and technology leaders representing various business units. So here in 10 months' time, Society Insurance data governance team cataloged about 16 data sources, addressed 18 business functions, and covered 10 data domains. And this program's launch was well structured. In the first 3 months, they started certifying 50 KPIs related to critical assets like claims data. By 6 months, this number grew to 100, and by the end of 10-month period, they had certified over 160 KPIs. So really interesting to see the real world impact of governance to somebody like you who might procure one of these insurance companies to be covered. And I'll pass it over to Kyle here.
Awesome. Thanks, Cash. So to talk about a real-world use of data observability, one of my favorite examples, since we're on a webinar on Zoom right now, is to talk about data observability at Zoom. So at Zoom, the challenge that they initially faced is that as Zoom scaled up, obviously they went through a hyper-growth phase and exploded as an organization very rapidly. As that was happening, data quality checks were being implemented super ad hoc. So it was through a series of SQL checks. They were placed at different places in the data pipeline. This was just an effort of individual heroes within the data team doing what they could to try to ensure that data quality checks were where they needed to be so that they could identify problems that might impact, for example, analytics that the GTM teams might use. So their sales and marketing teams, for example, are consuming information coming from the data platform, and having these sort of spot checks was really not scaling as the organization grew. So the way that they solved that using data observability was to deploy these very broad sets of monitors throughout their environment so that they could be alerted proactively about problems with data freshness, data that's not loading, issues with row counts, data that's not moving on time. And instead of point-to-point data quality checks instrumented by individuals by hand, they use Big Eye to automate the deployment of all of that monitoring across all of their pipelines so that they're able to detect those issues automatically instead of relying on spot checks here and there. And what that allowed them to do is actually start consistently identifying 2 to 3 data quality problems on a monthly basis that otherwise would have gotten through those ad hoc checks and caused some sort of a negative impact to their sales and marketing teams. The way that they did that was through a combination of integrating BigEye with their Airflow-based ETL system to make sure that we have checks running all the time as their jobs are running throughout the pipeline. They also use configuration as code. Now, this is one of the best ways to deploy data observability at scale. Their team's able to write these very short configuration files, and that can turn on hundreds or thousands of monitors throughout their environment to make sure that they have that really consistent and blanket coverage that leads to detecting 2 to 3 issues a month that would have otherwise been missed because of these ad hoc sort of checks. So I think Zoom's a great example of a company that went from checks here and there to having really adequate coverage everywhere to allow them to be proactive with data quality.
This awesome, Kyle. Being on Zoom and hearing the customer story from Zoom, that's pretty amazing. I like it. I want to bring our attendees to another topic. So, looking at industry analysts like Gartner, last week, Melody Shen addressed the topic of AI readiness. And she talked about 3 pillars and how different technologies are converging under a unified data management platform. So, it's really important to also see how the technology is changing today. The first pillar is here really talking about metadata management, which includes capabilities such as metadata discovery across various architecture settings, building data catalogs, capturing your business context in a glossary, and activating metadata for broader enterprise self-service. The second pillar is data quality. While we're not directly addressing this aspect today, most technologies today provide standard capabilities around cleansing, standardization, deduplication. However, many organizations still rely on homegrown SQL-based solutions to validate their data. And the third pillar is observability, and I'll let Kyle address this one.
So observability and metadata management, I think, go together very naturally. It's great to see this being presented by Melody at Gartner at DNA in Orlando just a couple weeks ago. In the next slide, we're going to talk about how the two, metadata management and observability, come together and where they form those overlaps. But looking at the trifecta here from the observability side, what you really should be looking for is the ability not to run pass-fail checks on your data that need to be instrumented by hand, but to use this very broad monitoring that can be rolled out in an automated fashion. That allows you to detect as many issues as possible, no matter where they're happening through your pipeline. You need great alerting and the ability to triage those signals as they come in. So this should be contextual information about what is the impact of a problem, where's the root cause of a problem coming from, what size of an impact is it going to have on your business users, so which users are downstream from wherever it is that the issue is occurring. That helps your team to triage that issue and understand, is this a low priority problem and it can go in our backlog, or is this a really high severity incident we need to wake somebody up because they need to fix this issue immediately so it doesn't have outsized business impact. Investigation tools. So these are tools built into the observability platform that help them look at row level data, information from ETL jobs, and really pinpoint what is causing the problem that's been identified by the monitoring. And then lastly, recommendations. So this is a more advanced feature in data observability, but this is the ability of the system to use things like Gen AI, for example, to take all that information about what types of issues are we detecting, where are we seeing them happening, what's the impact of those issues, and what was done to fix them, and tying all that together and giving recommendations to data engineers on how to fix problems while they're happening. And that helps reduce the amount of time that problem goes unresolved. And therefore, that reduces the amount of impact that it's going to have on the business.
Well, a lot to unpack there, Kyle. And I'm very pleased to see how our technologies as best of breed are coming together to align with what we're seeing in the market. I was very pleased to hear from Melody when I saw the slide. Is okay, this makes sense, and I'm very glad analysts are talking about it. So in the next slide, actually, I'll address a few things here, how the integration works, and some of the things Kyle just mentioned. Many thanks to our integration between DataGalaxy and BigEye, our strategic partnership. We're presenting a combined approach for any chief data officer, analytics leader. And here is a simplified overview of how our technology components work hand in hand with each other, and more importantly, adding value to your organization. So on the side where you see DataGalaxy here, we focus on helping leaders leverage our industry-leading user experience to govern and catalog their data. As seen in the example of Society Insurance, they successfully achieved an all-employee go live in a record 10 months' time. And additionally, a major focus of our Integration is really helping organizations establish end-to-end lineage. For instance, once data assets are brought under governance and cataloging, you can generate automated lineage from reports all the way down to your source data systems. In this case, I'm using an example of Power BI with data source from Snowflake or Databricks, some of the solutions you might be familiar with. And however, our story doesn't end there. Thanks to our integration with Big Eye, users can trust their data by hovering over any of the assets, wherein they could see the observability or the quality scores bridged from Big Eye. And this is where I'll also invite Kyle to address, specifically how the monitoring, alerts, and lineage works in our combined approach.
And I think it's great to highlight lineage there really as the main connection point between the two platforms. In Big Eye, by rolling out this broad monitoring for things like freshness, volume issues, validity, duplication, all these different types of errors that could happen in the pipeline, we use the lineage integration with DataGalaxy to map all those different types of problems we detect directly onto all the assets that you're going to find in DataGalaxy's catalog. We then also fire off alerts to the relevant parties. So that could be data analysts, that could be stewards and data engineers, and we can send those out in whatever channel makes sense for them. So that could be Slack, it could be a ticketing system like Jira or ServiceNow. We make sure that we get those alerts about those problems happening in the pipelines in front of the right people at the right time. And then separately, make sure that information shows up and is reflected in the quality scores that you'll find inside of the DataGalaxy catalog. Next, Cash, why don't we talk about some of the different implementation options that folks could consider for if they want to achieve both data governance, metadata management, and data observability? What are 3 different ways that they might be able to implement that within their enterprise?
Yeah, I actually see three different options, and I think you're going to address one of them here. Building in-house versus all-in-one platforms. I'm sure you all have seen that, and then also best-of-breed integration. Yeah, go ahead, Kyle.
All right. So let's start with, I think probably something that comes to mind for everybody is should we just build it? Now, different companies have different cultural biases around strong preference for building things in-house, really strong preference for buying. But this is a question that pretty much any leader is going to have to address at some point or other, which is, should we build it or how much should we build it? Now, the reason that I wanted to talk about this implementation option is because this is my background. Before starting Big Eye, I was on one of the teams here at Uber, and we built the product in-house. Some of our counterparts at companies like Airbnb and Netflix, this is back in 2015, 2016, we were all trying to deal with the same challenges, which were, how do I do data quality and pipeline reliability when I have hundreds of thousands of tables in a very large data lake? And all 3 teams decided to build things in-house. There weren't really commercially available solutions at the time. So what this initially stems from, and I'm sure you've seen this in some of your own companies, is you start a homegrown solution. It begins small very often. So this could be spreadsheets with data quality checks in them and links to where those checks have been created. This could be engineers standing up Python scripts. It could be checks built into ETL jobs. Going back to the example that we talked about earlier with Zoom, there was a sort of ad hoc grassroots effort to applying data quality. And I think that's the way that a lot of homegrown solutions get started. Where they run into scalability challenges is in driving adoption. So you start to see some good results from a small team that's starting to use it. You really want those results at the enterprise level. How do you do that? And that's where you start to run into issues with how do we scale out this homegrown solution and get every team that's working with the data platform to adopt it? How do we integrate it into all of the different places it needs to go? How do we get the results from our homegrown framework into our data catalog? How do we get alerts pushed into all the necessary channels? And so that initial really great, fast solution that delivered value, you start to run into these challenges as you try to scale it out to the whole company. They're also super resource intensive. At Uber, we had sometimes 15 to 20 people working in this area. So if you look at the cost of 15 full-time employee, fully loaded salaries, that really adds up. If you spend a couple of years building and implementing the solution, it's quite a large expenditure. So definitely some strong advantages from building in-house. I had a great experience leading the team at Uber that did this, and we learned a lot and built what I think was a very impressive solution internally. But there's also very material cost in going down this route that may not be obvious at the very beginning when you're getting that quick ROI from the sort of initial step that you take. So this is building in-house. Let's go to the opposite side of the spectrum and talk about buying a commercially available sort of all-in-one do everything platform. And for that, I think Cash, you have a great background and can speak to that with a lot of authority.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for sharing the details on the pros and cons around the if you build it in-house, what are you dealing with? So I've spent 4 years with Informatica as their head of data governance, catalog privacy, but I've come from different organizations. One of the things that I see is, of course, as a customer, it's appealing for you. You get everything in one platform. But the challenge here is the solution may be spread too thin. You're dealing with really generalization versus specialization. And this is where the market has shifted quite a bit. Most data leaders today, they require something intuitive that can appeal to their business personas and drive business adoption. And I'll be honest here, being in the data governance space, one of the biggest challenges, business adoption. How do you get the business people to engage and make these solutions work? If you look at the history of some of these solutions out there, Informatica started as a ETL company and now pivoted into other aspects of data management. Same with, if you look at Microsoft, their Purview solution may not always satisfy the business user requirement. It could tailor to a technical audience. Same with IBM, where you're dealing with perception around legacy, but also how do you make sure your audience understands what value these solutions bring for them. So really from a pros or cons perspective, all-in-one can be an easy way to go, but when you start to deploy it, it may have a steep learning curve. You may have spend a year, 12 months, 15 months to really educate people on these solutions and get to scale. And by the end of 1 year timeline, you're asked, hey, what is the value? How is this solution working? And this could be one of the things to consider when you're going all in with one platform. And which brings up to a key topic here about the best of breed, and I'll let Kyle address that.
Thanks, Cash. So obviously, you've got a couple of vendors here that we're presenting today that we're highly specialized in our respective areas. So DataGalaxy, strong record around data governance, cataloging, a ton of investment over the last several years into building a first-class product in those areas. And then same thing on our side at Big Eye, we're really focused on observability, incident management. How do we bring down the size of impact that a data quality issue can have? And so really the advantage to working with a couple of best of breed vendors and integrating them together is you're getting a really deep solution to each of those independent problems. So going back to Melody's trifecta of different components in AI readiness, metadata management, there's a ton of problems to work on in that space that DataGalaxy has deep expertise in. And then in the data observability area, that's really where Big Eye comes in. Now, the challenge, and I'm sure the concern that everybody would have is, great, I've got a really deep solution for this problem, and I've got a deep solution for that problem, but how do they work together? And so that was the advantage to going with an all-in-one platform. This is really the thing that I think you have to inspect carefully when you're choosing vendors is how well do they integrate? How well do they work together? What is the relationship between the two companies? And a big question, for example, is the user experience. So do you look at the integration and say, okay, great, if I have one user who's going to need to interact with both of these tools, what will the experience look like for them? And if it's a very lightweight integration that's just been slapped together quickly, that experience may not be very good. And in cases of some of the very large platform companies, they've actually become a large platform through M&A. And in that M&A, they've acquired a bunch of smaller vendors, and they have, in fact, stitched them together, sometimes in very lightweight ways. So best of breed vendors have a very strong incentive to develop these deep partnerships. And that's really, I think, something that you should be asking about when you're evaluating solutions is how strong is your relationship with the other vendor you're considering for that other piece of the puzzle, and understanding that the two companies are deeply aligned. So in the next section, I'm going to hand it back to Cash, and then we're actually going to look at the way that DataGalaxy and BigEye integrate and show examples of where we've focused a lot on ensuring that seamless user experience between the two platforms.
That's great, and thanks for that, Kyle. And it's a great pleasure to partner with Big Eye, and it's fun to actually work with the two teams here and cross share ideas. So I'll start out with combined value here, really just reiterating what Kyle just mentioned. And if you also remember at the beginning of this presentation, I talked about the governance aspect, observability aspect. The combined value is really helping you with your data governance needs, where DataGalaxy is giving you the ability to govern, catalog, look at your lineage, observability, making sure your data has visibility around its health and quality scores. So you are able to trust the data you're looking at, as well as integration is a big component where you not just have one company working for you, you have two companies and two big teams working for you with specialization. I think that's the biggest appeal, where as your data continues to grow, increase in complexity, you have these organizations ready to support you. So in the next series of slides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about different product highlights, so you actually see a sneak preview of how these integrations work. And you can also see the benefit that it brings for the end user. So I'll move on to the next slide here, product highlights. So really, we'll start with a few things here. So I want to maybe hit on first item, which is about quality score. Your data quality score can be tracked on all business metrics. So if you're a business user, you have a key KPI that everybody looks at or is taking initiative to govern. This is where you could see quality score on all of those business metrics while keeping your user experience top of mind, data ownership top of mind. So if you have people with different roles and responsibilities, they have one place to go to look at their business metrics as well as the scores coming from our integration. In the next slide, you can also have one centralized place to manage your governance and quality remediation workflows. So imagine you're looking at a metric and quality doesn't look right, or maybe the last sync is showing that there's some anomaly being detected. Here, any user, you could be a business user, can go in and report, hey, I found this issue. I would like to report it more from a data governance as well as quality perspective. And you could continue to track these issues over time. And you could also manage in one view what is like the workload for your team. And you could prioritize, deprioritize their tasks based on how critical your data is. And obviously, let's say you don't want to come into the solution all the time, look at all of these tasks that are assigned to you. Let's say you're commuting to work and Kyle is somebody who reported an issue. You could be pinged on Teams or Slack. Hey, somebody from so-and-so department just reported this issue. So we could bring these notifications to wherever you are, which makes it more seamless in terms of your engagement and your contribution to this governance and observability area. And in the next slide, I also maybe point out one more thing, and then I'll pass it over to Kyle in a second. Data monitoring, thanks to our joint integration with BigEye, what you could also do within our combined integration or in our platform is you could create a library of your data standards, quality standards. Let's say you have a critical report around finance and you want to make sure all of the KPIs that this report considers is complete or meets the standards of observability. This is where a business user, you don't need to be technical, can write this out in plain English text. We call them sensors in DataGalaxy, and these sensors are powered by BigEye. So anytime we deploy this sensor, BigEye is actually doing all the checks, monitoring this information, and providing results in real time, which can be scheduled on a regular basis. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kyle to maybe talk more about how our solutions integrate and add value.
Thanks, Cash. So as I mentioned earlier, BigEye is going to be monitoring at the column level, at the table level, looking for things like schema changes, freshness issues, duplicate data issues, data reconciliation problems between sources and destinations, all types of issues like that. we're going to be able to publish those directly inside of DataGalaxy so that when users are looking at things like, for example, merchant risk level here, they're going to see any detected problems from Big Eye right inside of DataGalaxy. So that means that your analysts or business users or folks who are inside the catalog who might have questions, is this data healthy right now or not? Can I use this particular data asset or data product? They're going to get a very quick answer to that without needing to go inside of the Big Eye platform. They get it right inside of the catalog here. And so we're able to publish all that information inside of DataGalaxy and let those users stay where they need to be to get their workflow done without needing to jump into another tool. So that's a really great advantage to the native integration between the platforms, is reducing the rate at which people need to jump from one product to another. Now, on the alerting side, so we just talked about how we can expose all that quality information to a business user, to a steward, to an analyst. Now, what about the people who need to respond to these issues and triage them and take action to get them fixed? So this is what an alert looks like. This particular example is from Slack, but these can also be Microsoft Teams, Jira tickets, ServiceNow tickets. We can also integrate with other systems like PagerDuty and OpsGenie. And so in this case, what we're doing is we're summarizing all the critical information that a responder would need to know. So we know what was the anomaly that was detected, where did it happen. We have an AI overview here that explains in plain English what was the size of the anomaly, what was affected by it. Are there any downstream reports or dashboards that will have degraded data quality if this problem is not resolved? And we can summarize all that in these nice alerts. And these are, again, sent in real time. So you don't have to wait for an issue to make it all the way down to the end of a pipeline. Now, I mentioned that in these alerts, we can include information like impacted objects, and Cash also referred to data lineage earlier. So I want to talk about lineage and the way lineage works between the two platforms as well. So column level lineage is critical both for a data governance use case, but also for an observability use case when it comes to managing data quality. Now, what that means is that both DataGalaxy and Big Eye have implemented really advanced data lineage collection capabilities. So one of the things that you have to think about when you're implementing two different products is if I'm going to have two sources of truth for my lineage throughout all my pipelines. With the integration between Big Eye and DataGalaxy, you don't have to worry about that because we integrate and merge together those two lineage graphs. So what that means is that if Big Eye has lineage harvesters for certain technologies that maybe DataGalaxy doesn't currently have support for, by using both platforms together, you get the best of both worlds. We're able to integrate those lineage graphs, and your users inside of DataGalaxy can see a full view of your data pipeline and your data landscape. And then users who are responding to data quality issues and they're going to resolve them in Big Eye, they see the exact same landscape in the same map, and you don't have multiple sources of truth competing and causing confusion. So this is a really key part of the integration that I think is important anytime you're thinking about implementing both metadata management and data catalog and a data observability solution. This is a key question you're going to want to ask is, if both tools support lineage, how do they work together in harmony? Cash, is there anything you wanted to add on lineage before we move on?
Yeah, no, I think you covered, especially I think the experiences, and you made a good point here that users don't have to go back and forth between the two solutions. Retaining the user experience remains top of mind as we work together here. If you're a business user, you want to understand how your data is moving from its cradle to the grave, what transformations it goes through. I think it's also important that the value our integration with Big Eye brings here is like if you can know exactly what sources applications where data gets transformed may need more attention. And as you mentioned, Kyle, doing upstream, downstream impact assessment, very critical as people make changes to data in real time and they can stray true to the changes they're making with data. Great points. I know we're coming right on time here. We have about 14 minutes remaining, and I'm very pleased that we were able to complete it so we can have the opportunity to engage with the audience as well. I'll open the floor for any questions people have. Feel free to, if you have a question, feel free to put your question in the chat window. Any questions for myself, Kyle, or regarding the presentation? No questions means that we have done a great job, basically. That's what you're validating. Okay. Maybe while we're waiting, Kyle, I can ask if I can ask a question just in terms of I think your experience because observability. I see Gartner is also coming out with a augmented data quality report. I'm curious, as you're serving so many different organizations, how are you processing the insights coming out from these reports, and where do you see the data observability place going in general?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think this goes back to we'd skipped over the data quality piece of the trifecta that Melody presented, but augmented data quality from my reading of sort of the materials coming out of Gartner and other leading analysts, the main gap between products that fall into the data quality category, which has been around for many years at this point, and observability, which is this newer category, is primarily whether or not they're taking action directly on the data. And then it's a question of breadth. So observability platforms are going to measure things like freshness, volume, schema changes, other types of things that might be happening in your pipelines. Lineage is a huge component. And then where you see more of an emphasis with data quality platforms is cleansing, deduplication, and a lot of actual modification of the data. Data observability platforms are more focused on making sure you can see your entire landscape, you understand the performance of the pipelines, what's going on inside them, with less of an emphasis on actually modifying any data.
Yeah, and I see actually spot on. I see there's a question from Kristen Danger. Are there any built-in rules in Big I for certain quality dimensions like completeness, validity? And do you have the ability to write custom rules in Big I? If so, what language?
Those are both great questions. Thanks, Kristen. So yes, the Big I has about 70 built-in rules, and they are grouped into dimensions of pipeline reliability, which would be data freshness and volume, completeness, uniqueness, numeric distributions, validity, which would be checks for things like formats, UUIDs, product SKUs. And then there's an additional data quality dimension for custom monitoring. So a lot of our enterprise customers do add customized monitoring. It's important to note that custom monitoring in Big I still works with all of the built-in features around anomaly detection, impact analysis. So there's no penalty for creating custom monitoring inside the platform. And the custom monitoring is written in SQL. And so what that means is a lot of times your data engineer or your data analyst or your steward who's already familiar with SQL, they're going to be very easily able to express those sort of custom checks inside the platform in a way that's reusable. So you can define a check once and then you can use it over and over again throughout your environment.
Great, and thanks for answering that. And great question, Kristen. If there are any other questions, feel free to chime in here. And I'm also looking at the Q&A. Will you be sharing the presentation? Yes, we will be sharing that. Then the next question is, how long does the installation take for about 5 sources? I see capturing the lineage and its transformations the biggest issue. I could chime in, and also Kyle, you could complete the answer here. I think in terms of, as you've seen one of the stories that referenced, of course, I'm assuming as a customer, you're not boiling the ocean. What we recommend is start with the most critical data source. In our experience, depending on the size of the organization, we've seen anywhere between going into production from 2 to 3 months, 6 months, if you will. Again, this is really based on scope use cases here. At DataGalaxy, I could talk about DataGalaxy here. We have about 80 plus connectors that can tie into applications like Snowflake, Databricks, Power BI, all the way from reporting, warehousing, RDBMS. We have great coverage there. And then in terms of transformation, of course, the connectors are also designed to procure lineage. And I also see this is a big power that Big I brings to the table, where sometimes we may not cover a technology and they have a connector for it. So maybe Kyle, if you want to chime in here.
Yeah, so most of the implementation time with Big I is usually in getting the credentials for each of the target data sources. So in order to establish that full chain of lineage from, let's say, Oracle, IBM DB2 databases, MySQL, your ETL system, your data warehouse or your lake, and then all the way down to your analytics tools, we need to have service accounts on each of those technologies you want to be able to monitor. So a lot of the implementation time we see is not actually deploying the software, it's doing the work internally to get the service account for each of the sources, make sure all that information is ready to go. The actual setup time for Big Eye is on the order of a couple hours. So once you have that information, we actually have a command line tool that will work with your DevOps team or your SRE team or somebody who works in infrastructure. They'll use that command line tool. They provide the credentials for those different sources, and the command line tool automates the deployment of agents inside of your environment. And that way, all your credentials stay inside your VPC or your on-prem environment, and Big Eye never has access to those secure credentials. But it allows us to automate the deployment of all those lineage agents for you. And those lineage agents are each built to extract column level lineage automatically from each of those respective sources. So there's very little to no manual lineage establishment that needs to happen. The case where you would have a longer implementation time is if you have a totally custom ETL framework, in which case we need to show you how to use our SDK to publish lineage. But if you're using things like Informatica Power Center, IBM DataStage, SnapLogic, Talend, Azure Data Factory, we can pull automated lineage out of those with our custom lineage parsers.
I have one more question here, Kyle. What is your licensing model look like per source, record, user, etc.?
You want to take this for DataGalaxy first, Cash?
Yeah, I can. So our licensing model is very simple. It's based on number of power users. So if you need a person to edit information like update a description, update a tag, write a data quality rule, that requires a license. And our readership today is unlimited, and we don't charge based on sources. So it's kept simple because for you as a leader, you want to have predictability, how many users are going to be the key actors, and then people who are going to be consuming your work shouldn't come as at a cost. So you could drive that business adoption and reach out to more people in the organization.
And on the Big Eye side, we have really two levers that drive pricing. One is you buy one time, it's an annual license for each of those lineage connectors that you need. So for example, you might buy a connector for Tableau, connector for Power BI, connector for Snowflake, connector for Power Center, connector for Oracle. That would allow you to get end-to-end lineage throughout that entire system. So you pay for those connectors. It's just a flat annual license per technology. And then you pay for the amount of monitoring that you need us to do for you. So remember that we're deploying blanket monitoring. That means anomaly detection running across all of the data in your sources that you want to monitor. So you might, for example, buy a license for 1,000 tables worth of monitoring, and tables is the unit there that you purchase with for the licensing. So you might start with 1,000 tables, you might start with 500 tables, and then you can just expand the number of tables in your license over time. Of course, volume discounting applies to that as well. So by the time you get up to 10,000 tables, 20,000 tables, your cost per table really drops quite a lot. So you get to a lot of efficiency at that point. And that's because we're able to scale those anomaly detection models when we know that you have a lot of data that you're going to be monitoring.
Great to hear about that, and also hear about the benefits of this pricing for the end user. So thanks for adding that. I'm looking at the time. We have 4 minutes remaining. So it's still a chance. If you have any questions, feel free to post your questions in the chat here. I'm just checking again in the Q&A if there are any open questions from the audience. Okay. Looks like I think our audience pretty much asked all the questions today, Kyle, and I really enjoyed having you here and doing this joint presentation with you. And it's also great to partner with Big Eye, especially combining the efforts from data governance, data observability, and bringing more value for our data leaders. Yeah.
Appreciate the
Any
partnership.
any last comments, questions, or anything in closing here?
Thanks for having me on, Cash. Like I said, great to be able to present the two products side by side and highlight some of the integration. Like I said, I think one of the things that people are most hesitant about with going with a best of breed solution is how well do these two things work together. Hopefully, we covered that in good detail today and dispelled that question or concern about using DataGalaxy and Big Eye together. And I'm excited to work with some folks and show them what you can do when you have observability and governance under one roof.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for spending your day with us.